Indriyeshu manastani tanmatreshu yatho bhavam bhuta dinamuni utkrishya mahati atmani sandade. He amalgamated the mind with the senses and the senses with the sense objects. And according to their respective positions, he also amalgamated the material ego with the total material energy, Mahat Tattva. In respect to the ego, the total material energy is sundered in two parts. One agitated by the mode of ignorance, and the other agitated by the mode of passion and goodness. Due to the agitation by the mode of ignorance, the five gross elements are created. Due to the agitation by the mode of passion, the mind is created. And due to the agitation by the mode of goodness, false egoism or identification with matter is created. The mind is protected by a particular type of demigod. Sometimes the mind, mana, is also understood to have a controlling deity or demigod. In this way, the total mind, namely the material mind controlled by the material demigods, was amalgamated with the senses. The senses, in turn, were amalgamated with the sense objects. The sense objects are forms, tastes, smells, sounds, etc. Sound is the ultimate source of sense objects. The mind was attracted by the senses, and the senses by the sense objects, and all of them were ultimately amalgamated in the sky. The creation is so arranged that the cause and effect follow one after the other. The merging process involves amalgamating the effect with the original cause. Since the ultimate cause in the material world is Mahat Tattva, everything was gradually wound up and amalgamated with the Mahat Tattva. This may be compared to Shunyavad or voidism, but this is the process of cleansing the real spiritual mind or consciousness. When the mind is completely washed off all the material contamination, the pure consciousness acts. The sound vibration from the spiritual sky can automatically cleanse all the material contaminations as confirmed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Cheto Darpana Marjanam. We need only take the advice of Lord Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and chant the Hare Krishna mantra to cleanse the mind of all the material contamination. And this may be considered the summary of this difficult verse. As soon as the whole material contamination is washed away by this process of chanting, all desires and reactions to the material activities become immediately vanquished. and real peaceful existence begins. In this age of Kali, it is very difficult to adopt the yogic process mentioned in this verse. Unless one is very expert in such yoga, the best course is to adopt the ways and means of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Krishna Sankirtanam. Thus, one can gloriously become freed from all material contamination by the simple process of chanting the Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Just as life in this material world has its beginning in the material sound, similarly, a spiritual life has a beginning in the spiritual sound vibration. Srila Prabhupada explains here, seeing how Prithu Maharaj is winding up his body. This process is not the process of voidism, this process is the process of cleansing. The material effect is merged with the cause. And Prabhupada is explaining that this is a very arduous practice. But everything can be achieved by the simple and sublime way Lord Chaitanya has uh, recommended for us. And that is simply by chanting the holy names of the Lord. All these contaminations, material contaminations of the mind, can be cleansed. So basically, Prithu Maharaj is mixing the sense objects with the senses, and the senses the mind. You know? So the effect of the cause, the material effect of the cause. So now the point is, you see, basically what is happening? There is a material cause, there is a material effect. Now, so when we are in a position, or our situation is, when our situation is like that, that Jai Shri Jai Jan Gochan Bhagwan. So basically, there are these sense objects, and these sense objects are giving captivating signals. Now, when we are attached to the senses, then the senses catch these captivating signals. Now, when the senses catch these captivating signals, and we are attached to the senses in the bodily consciousness, then we get affected. And this is how the entanglement takes place. You know, or basically because now the sense signal gets priority, then it goes to the mind does processing and all that, and in that way that signal is amplified, intensified and all that, it creates illusion and entanglement. Now the point which comes is that when as a spirit soul we separate ourselves from this signal, the senses, the sense objects are giving the signal to the senses, but we are not attached to the senses, then that signal is not going any further. Nah, the signal is not going any further. Then it is as good as the senses and sense objects are one now. Because it's as good as, because that is not affecting the soul. So, so in effect, that merging, or that we can say extrication has taken place. That's the point actually. That's why you see. So basically, the process of merging is what? The process of merging is process of taking the soul aloof from this entire cycle. So, so just like a camera, when nobody is, when nobody is, when there is no utility of the image the camera is taking, then whether the camera is taking image or not taking doesn't matter. Neither that image is stored, nor it is processed, nor it has been seen by anybody. So, uh, uh, that's the point actually. The senses, the sense objects. Only when the living entity becomes attached to this entire circuitry, then only the problem happens. So basically, it's no, it's two things. It's no, on one sense we can say, okay, we are getting rid of all this from our existence. That is the spirit soul's activities and processing. There are no one is extricating all connections. Or the other way of saying is that we take the soul off from this entire material circuitry. Both mean the same thing, actually. So that is why, by the simple process of chanting, all material contamination subsides. So it's like you can say, okay, the eyes are seeing. The eyes are seeing is not a big problem. Only when we are focusing on what the eyes are seeing, then there is a problem. Is it not? So when you're not focusing on what the eyes are seeing, then whether the eyes are seeing or not seeing, it doesn't matter. Because anyway, that signal was not given any priority. So that can happen only when we get aloof from all these material signals. Tam sarvaguna vinyasham jive maya mayenadya tam chanusayam atmastham asav anushayi puman jnana vairagya viryena sarupastho jahat prabhu. Prithu Maharaj then offered the total designation of the living entity unto the supreme controller of illusory energy, being released from all the designations by which the living entity becomes entrapped. He became free by knowledge and renunciation and by the spiritual force of his devotional service. In this way, being situated in his original constitutional position of Krishna consciousness, he gave up this body as a Prabhu or controller of his senses. As stated in the Vedas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a source of material energy. Consequently, he is sometimes called Maya Maya, or the Supreme Person, who can create his pastimes through his potency known as the material energy. The jiva, or the individual living entity, becomes entrapped by the material energy by the supreme will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita 1861, we understand Ishvara Sarva Bhutana Riddeshe Arjuna Tishtati Brahmayan Sarva Bhutani Yantra Rudani Mayaya. Ishvara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is situated within the heart of all the conditioned souls. And by his supreme will, the living entity or individual soul gets the facility to lord it over the material nature. In various types of bodies, which are known as yantra, or the vehicle, moving vehicle offered by the total material energy, Maya. Although the individual living entity, Jiva, and the Lord are both situated within the material energy, the Lord is directing the movements of the Jiva soul by offering him different types of bodies through the material energy. And thus the living entity is wandering throughout the universes in various forms of body and becomes implicated in different situations, partaking of the reactions of fruitive activities. When Prithu Maharaj became spiritually powerful, By the enhancement of spiritual knowledge, jnana, and renunciation of material desires, he became a Prabhu or master of his senses, sometimes called Goswami or Swami. This means that he was no longer controlled by the influence of the material energy. When one is strong enough to give up the influence of the material energy, he is called Prabhu. In this verse, the word Swarupastha is also very significant. The real identity of the individual soul lies in understanding or attaining the knowledge that he is eternally a servant of Krishna. This understanding is called Swarupopalabdhi. By culturing devotional service, the devotee gradually comes to understand his actual relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This understanding of one's pure spiritual position is called Surupo Upalabdhi. And when one attains that stage, he can understand how he is related with the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a servant or a friend, or as a parent or conjugal lover. This stage of understanding is called Surupastha. Prithu Maharaj realized this Swarupa completely, and it will be clear in the later verses that he personally left this world or this body by riding on a chariot sent from Vaikuntha. In this verse, the word Prabhu is also significant, as stated before. When one is completely self realized and acts according to that position, he can be called Prabhu. The spiritual master is addressed as Prabhupada because he is a completely self realized soul. The word Pad means position. Prabhupada indicates that he is given the position of Prabhu or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for he acts on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless one is Prabhu or controller of the senses, he cannot act as spiritual master who is authorized by the Supreme Prabhu or Lord Krishna. In his verses praising the spiritual master, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, Sakshat Harittvena Samasta Shastre Uktastatha Bhavayat Eva Sadbhi. The spiritual master is honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord. Thus, Prithu Maharaj can also be called Prabhupada or, as described herein, Prabhu. Another question may be raised in this connection. Since Prithu Maharaj was a power incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shakti Avesh Avatar, why did he have to execute the regulative principles in order to become a Prabhu? Because he appeared on this earth as an ideal king, and because it is the duty of the king to instruct the citizens in the execution of devotional service. He followed all the regulative principles of devotional service in order to teach others. Similarly, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, although Krishna himself, taught us how to approach Krishna as a devotee. It is said, Apani Achari Bhakti Shikainu Sabare. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed others in the process of devotional service by setting the example himself through his own personal actions. Similarly, Prithu Maharaj, although a Shakti Avesh avatar incarnation, still behaved exactly as a devotee in order to achieve the position of Prabhu. Furthermore, Sarupastha means complete liberation. As it is said in Bhagavatam 2:10-6, Hitvan yatha rupam sarupena vivastiti. When a living entity abandons the activities of Maya and attains the position from which he can execute devotional service, his state is called Surupastha or complete liberation. Srila Prabhupada begins here by explaining how the living entity is awarded these material bodies which are like vehicles, and using these bodies, the person is wandering throughout the universe. So the living entity thinks that he is controlling the material energy, but the living entity is himself completely controlled by the material energy, and uh, therefore one is helplessly entangled. Now, the rescue can only happen when one stops being affected. And that is a stage which Prithu Maharaj is demonstrating. So we see that the progressive practice of steady devotional service brings one to a stage when one will no longer be affected by the material desires. And in that way, one will no longer be controlled by the material energy. In this stage, one can, at this stage, one can control his senses. And that is where one is called as a Prabhu or a Goswami or a Swami. And Prabhupada is stressing the point that by progressive devotional service, this is very much possible. So when the living entity allows the material desire to permeate and germinate, and that material desire completely overwhelms the living entity. And thus one becomes helplessly entangled. Prabhupada explains Prithu Maharaj by jnana, by renunciation. By these two weapons, he was able to see by jnana and renunciation. Prithu Maharaj was able to control his senses. अर्चिर्नाम महाराजनी तत्पत्नी अनुगतवनम सुकुमारी तद अर्हच यत् पद्भयं स्पर्शनम भुवा. The queen, the wife of Prithu Maharaj, whose name was Archi, followed her husband in the forest. Since she was a queen, her body was very delicate. Although she did not deserve to live in the forest, she voluntarily touched her lotus feet to the ground. Because Prithu Maharaj's wife was a queen and also the daughter of a king, she never experienced walking on the ground. For queens used to never come out of the palace. They certainly never went to the forest and tolerated all the difficulties of living in the wilderness. In Vedic civilization, there are hundreds of similar examples of such renunciation on the part of queens and dedication to the husband. The goddess of fortune, Mother Sita, followed her husband Ramachandra when he went to the forest Lord Ramachandra went to the forest in compliance with the order of his father, Maharaj Dasharath. But Mother Sita was not so ordered. Nonetheless, she voluntarily accepted the path of her husband. Similarly, Gandhari, the wife of King Dhritarashtra, also followed her husband into the forest. Being the wives of great personalities like Prithu, Lord Ramachandra, and Dhritarashtra, these were ideal, chaste women. Such queens also instructed the general people by showing them how to become a chaste wife and follow the husband in every stage of life. When the husband is a king, she sits beside him as a queen. And when he goes to the forest, she also follows, despite having to tolerate all kinds of difficulties in living in the forest. Therefore, it is said here, Atat Arha, that although she did not want to touch her feet to the ground, she nonetheless accepted all the difficulties when she went to the forest with her husband. So, great souls, we see in the life of great souls, uh, great acharyas have always shown by their example uh, their dedication in both sides of the duality, or both sides, or both extremes of duality. So we see Maharaj Prithu and Mother Archie's dedication when they had all facilities and opulences, and we also see now their dedication when there is no opulence. So in this way, great acharyas are demonstrating that by their own lives, that that dedication is possible without any polarity of the material settings. Many times, being conditioned, one places his spiritual life on on many prerequisites of material settings, and that is where a progressive sadhaka may get trapped. So, what to do? Should we accept? Should we reject? What should we do? Uh, the basic recommendation of the acharyas is that we keep the material settings on a secondary priority, and then whether positive is coming, negative is coming, you continue in Krishna consciousness. The Shastras are giving us the matrix of balance. To start with, one can give a regulated time towards one material duties and conditioned duties, and slowly reduce that time. Slowly reduce that time. That is a recommendation of the Shastras and the Acharyas for us. But we see the great example of the Acharyas. So whether they have facilities, whether they don't have facilities, their dedication, their surrender. Uh, so they don't mind any material conditions. But what they are focused about is to set a right example of dedication and surrender. So here we see Prithu Maharaj and then Mother Archie showing that setting that amazing example. Yes. Previous verse. 18, right? Text 18, right? Yes. This is highlighting that everything is man proposes, God disposes. That's what it highlights. So the Lord is the explanation of this is in the Yantrarurani Brahmayam Sarvabhutani. That's the explanation. Or the further. The Lord is directing the wanderings. The Lord is only guiding the living entity in wandering because the living entity wanted it like that. So this is man proposes, God disposes. So the Lord is only helping the living entity in moving around in this material world, but that is not what is the Lord's heart. That is the adamant demand of the stubborn living entity. The Lord's heart is He gives, along with all this, He's also giving the facility that if the living entity wants, he can get out of this cycle. So this the Lord is not doing. Uh, this the Lord is doing out of just complying by or just accepting the stubborn demands of the living entity. Uh, because if the Lord doesn't support, the living entity cannot do anything. That is the whole point. So actually, the living entity is able to do a lot of things in this material world. So sometimes a normal person may marvel how people can do so much. It's like you went in the Yatra in Kanyakumari, then there is this bridge on the ocean, and train is going on that. Ah, that same thing, same thing. It's same thing, South India, South India Yatra, it's the same thing. So, so when I saw that, it's amazing. It looks like marvel, no? Very amazing. How is it possible to make a pillar like that? How is it possible to, uh, we are waiting for the rains to end so that we can start making pillars, in our land. So how they can make a pillar in an ocean, Amazing. So man, they have made an island on the ocean. Okay, it only lasts for 20 years, but still, it's a marvelous achievement. Obviously, its place utility value is not much, but similarly, people perform such kinds of heroic activities. They jump from the air. They go up 5,000 feet, 30,000 feet over sea level, and they jump inside the sea. People do what not. Yeah, people do what not. But all this is not just possible because of determination. All this is only possible because Lord is allowing it. And that is the point. All this is uh, people can do tremendous things. Some people, my God, there are people who can yeah, they can do tremendous things. There are people who can run 150 kilometers non-stop. Mm, Non-stop. 150 kilometers, they can just run, you know, non-stop. Every day they do that. Huh? So it's amazing. There are people. So all this is not just possible. Actually, the materialistic people, they show all these kind of things and they show that okay, if the living entity wants, he can achieve anything. Actually, they are completely showing a wrong picture. It is a Lord which is who is allowing the living entity. Therefore, the living entity is able to show all these things. So for others, even that is like how they can do it, is it not? Uh, one thing is very powerful. One thing is very powerful, is it not? Mhm. Anywhere and any field we can see actually how they have made such complicated machines. Medical science, if you see, how they have gone inside the body. It's a living system, and they have gone inside it, and they are able to produce some results also. The Lord is directing. So the living entity very much wants it. The Lord shows in the way. Okay, this is where you can do it.